In the mountains of Afghanistan, where death lurks behind every rock and survival depends on split-second decisions, Staff Sergeant Maria Santos never imagined that her greatest battle would begin with a betrayal. What started as a routine patrol in hostile territory would become a story of human resilience, unexpected heroism, and the unbreakable bond between soldiers who have never met. Sometimes the difference between life and death is measured not in miles or minutes, but in the steady hand of a stranger who refuses to let evil win. This is the true story of how one woman's desperate cry for help echoed across a canyon and reached the ears of a legendary sniper who would risk everything to answer that call. The mountains keep many secrets, but this story demands to be told. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos wiped the sweat from her forehead as she adjusted her rifle strap. The Afghan sun beat down mercilessly on the rocky terrain, and her uniform clung to her back like a second skin. She had been deployed to Forward Operating Base Chapman for 8 months now, and the harsh landscape had become as familiar as her childhood neighborhood in Texas. But familiarity in a war zone was a dangerous thing. It made you comfortable, and comfort could get you killed. Maria led a small reconnaissance team through the treacherous mountain paths of Coast Province. Their mission was simple: gather intelligence on enemy movements in the region and report back to base. What made this mission different was their guide, a local Afghan man named Rashid, who claimed to have valuable information about Taliban positions. He had approached the base 3 days earlier, offering his services in exchange for protection for his family. The team consisted of 5 soldiers. Maria as team leader, Corporal Jake Williams as the medic, Specialist Tommy Chen handling communications, Private First Class Sarah Rodriguez on point, and Sergeant Mike Thompson covering their rear. They had worked together for months, and Maria trusted each of them with her life. Trust was everything in combat, and her team had earned it through countless missions in these unforgiving mountains. Rashid moved ahead of them with the confidence of someone who knew every rock and crevice in these hills. He was a thin man in his 40s, with weathered hands and eyes that seemed to hold the weight of years of conflict. He spoke broken English, but communicated well enough to guide them through the safer paths that avoided known enemy positions. Maria had worked with local guides before, and while she maintained her guard, Rashid seemed genuine in his desire to help American forces. The morning had started like any other patrol. They left the base before dawn, moving through the darkness with night vision equipment, following predetermined waypoints toward their target area. Intelligence suggested that a high-value Taliban commander was using a compound in the valley below as a meeting place. Their job was to confirm this information and establish observation posts for a potential future operation. As they climbed higher into the mountains, the terrain became more challenging. Loose rocks made every step treacherous, and the thin air at altitude made breathing difficult. Maria called for regular rest stops, knowing that exhausted soldiers made mistakes, and mistakes in this environment were often fatal. During these breaks, Rashid would point out landmarks and share information about enemy patrol patterns he had observed. By midday, they had reached a ridgeline that provided an excellent view of the target valley. Maria set up her team in defensive positions while she and Rashid moved forward to conduct reconnaissance. Through her binoculars, she could see the compound in question, a collection of mud brick buildings surrounded by a low wall. There was activity around the structures, but from this distance, it was impossible to determine if their high-value target was present. The plan was to maintain observation until nightfall, gather photographic evidence, and then withdraw to a safe distance for extraction the following morning. It was a routine mission that Maria had executed dozens of times before. She felt confident in her team's abilities and comfortable with their tactical position. The ridge provided excellent visibility while offering multiple escape routes if they were discovered. Rashid had been helpful throughout the morning, pointing out details about the compound that weren't visible in satellite imagery. He knew which buildings were used for what purposes and had information about the daily routines of the people inside. His intelligence seemed accurate and valuable, exactly what they needed to make their mission a success. As afternoon turned to evening, Maria rotated her soldiers through different observation points, ensuring everyone stayed alert while getting adequate rest. The temperature began to drop as the sun moved lower in the sky, and she knew they would need to start thinking about their nighttime positions soon. The plan was to maintain surveillance through the night and then begin their withdrawal at first light. It was during this transition period, as Maria was discussing the evening watch schedule with her team, that everything changed. Rashid approached her with a concerned expression, speaking rapidly in his broken English about something he claimed to have spotted in the valley below. He insisted that they needed to move to a different observation point immediately, one that would provide a better view of what he had seen. Maria was initially hesitant to change positions unnecessarily, But Rashid seemed genuinely worried about missing something important. He led her away from the main group toward what he claimed was a superior vantage point about 200 meters away. The location he indicated was at the edge of a cliff that dropped nearly 300 feet into the valley below. It would indeed provide an excellent view, but it was also more exposed and dangerous. As they approached the cliff edge, Maria began to feel uneasy. Something in Rashid's manner had changed subtly, and her combat instincts were sending warning signals. She had learned to trust these feelings over months of dangerous missions, and they had kept her alive when logic alone might have failed her. She stopped about 10 feet from the edge and told Rashid she wanted to call their team over before proceeding. That was when Rashid's mask finally slipped. His expression changed from concerned guide to something much more sinister, and Maria realized with horrible clarity that she had walked into a carefully planned trap. The man she had trusted to guide her team safely through enemy territory was working for the very forces they were hunting. His offer of intelligence had been a ruse to lure American soldiers into a vulnerable position where they could be captured or killed. The betrayal hit Maria like a physical blow. She had been careful, had followed all protocols, had maintained appropriate suspicion of their guide while still being able to work with him effectively. But Rashid had played his role perfectly, earning their trust gradually while leading them deeper into danger. Now she was alone with him, separated from her team, standing near the edge of a cliff, with nowhere to run. Rashid pulled out a radio and began speaking rapidly in Pashto, clearly communicating with other enemy forces in the area. Maria realized that her team was likely surrounded, that this entire mission had been a setup from the beginning. The Taliban had used Rashid to lure them into a kill zone, and she had played right into their hands by agreeing to move to this isolated position. The sound of gunfire erupted from the direction where she had left her team, confirming her worst fears. Her soldiers were under attack, and she was trapped with nowhere to go except over the cliff behind her. Rashid finished his radio call and turned back to her with a cold smile, pulling out a knife from beneath his robes. He said something in Pashto that she didn't understand, but his intentions were clear enough. Maria's training kicked in automatically. She went for her sidearm, but Rashid was closer than she had realized and moved faster than she expected. They struggled briefly at the cliff's edge, fighting for control of her weapon while loose rocks scattered beneath their feet. The 300-foot drop yawned behind them, promising death to whoever lost this desperate battle. The betrayal was complete when Rashid managed to grab her by the shoulders and began forcing her toward the edge. Maria fought with everything she had, knowing that falling from this height meant certain death. But Rashid was stronger than his thin frame suggested, and he had the advantage of knowing exactly what he intended to do. As they grappled on the narrow ledge, Maria could hear her team's gunfight continuing in the distance, the sound of automatic weapons echoing off the canyon walls. In that moment of desperate struggle, Maria Santos understood that she was about to die in these foreign mountains, betrayed by someone she had tried to help. The irony was bitter. A soldier who had survived 8 months of combat operations was going to be killed, not by an enemy sniper or an improvised explosive device, but by falling off a cliff after being betrayed by the very person she had trusted to keep her safe. The last thing Maria remembered before Rashid gave her the final push was the sound of her own voice screaming for help as she fell backward into empty air. The cry echoed across the canyon, a desperate plea that seemed to disappear into the vast emptiness of the Afghan wilderness. As she fell, time seemed to slow, and she wondered if anyone would ever know what had really happened to her team in these remote mountains. The fall seemed to last forever, her body tumbling through space, while the rocky cliff face rushed past her. Maria closed her eyes and thought of her family back home, of the parents who would receive a visit from uniformed officers bearing the news that their daughter had died serving her country. She thought of her team members, hoping they would somehow survive the ambush she had unknowingly led them into. But sometimes, in the most desperate moments, when all hope seems lost and death appears certain, the universe provides an unexpected miracle. As Maria Santos fell toward what should have been her death, her desperate cry for help was about to reach the ears of someone who never ignored a call for assistance, someone whose legendary skills and unwavering moral code would not allow him to stand by while an innocent person died. The mountains of Afghanistan had claimed many lives over the years, but they were not going to claim Maria Santos without a fight. Master Sergeant David "Ghost" Morrison had been lying motionless in his concealed position for over 18 hours. His ghillie suit blended perfectly with the rocky terrain and sparse vegetation of the Afghan mountainside, making him virtually invisible to anyone more than a few feet away. This was his specialty, his art form perfected through 15 years of service and over 300 confirmed kills. He was a legend among military snipers, a man whose reputation preceded him wherever Special Operations Forces gathered. Ghost had earned his nickname not just for his ability to remain unseen, but for his uncanny talent for appearing where the enemy least expected him. He moved through hostile territory like a phantom, striking from impossible distances before vanishing without a trace. His service record was classified, but stories about his missions had spread throughout the Special Operations community. Some said he could hit a target at over 2 miles in perfect conditions. Others claimed he had once eliminated an entire enemy squad without them ever knowing where the shots were coming from. The truth was both simpler and more complex than the legends suggested. David Morrison was indeed an exceptional marksman, but his real gift was patience. While other soldiers rushed into action, Ghost waited. He studied his targets for hours or even days, learning their patterns and habits until he could predict their movements with uncanny accuracy. This patience, combined with his technical skills and years of experience, made him one of the most effective snipers in military history. His current mission was a solo operation, something he preferred whenever possible. Working alone eliminated the complications that came with coordinating with other personnel and allowed him to focus entirely on his objective. He had been inserted into this remote area 3 days ago to eliminate a high-value Taliban commander who was known to use the valley below as a safe haven. Intelligence indicated that the target would be attending a meeting in the compound sometime in the next 48 hours. Ghost's position was on a ridge approximately 1,500 meters from the target building, well within his effective range but far enough away to remain undetected. He had chosen this location after careful study of the terrain and prevailing wind conditions. The ridge provided multiple escape routes and excellent visibility, while keeping him completely hidden from anyone in the valley below. His rifle, a customized M24 sniper weapon system, was perfectly zeroed and equipped with the finest optical equipment military technology could provide. The waiting was the hardest part for most snipers, but Ghost found it meditative. He had learned to enter a state of relaxed alertness where he could remain motionless for hours while staying completely aware of his surroundings. His breathing was controlled, his heart rate steady, his mind focused on the task ahead. This was more than just a job for him. It was a calling, a way of life that had defined his entire adult existence. As morning turned to afternoon, Ghost noticed increased activity around the compound. Vehicles had been arriving throughout the day, and armed men were taking positions around the perimeter. This suggested that his target might indeed be preparing for the meeting intelligence had predicted. He adjusted his scope slightly and began cataloging the faces he could see, comparing them to photographs in his mission briefing. The compound consisted of several mud brick buildings arranged around a central courtyard. The main building appeared to be where the meeting would take place, based on the level of security being established around it. Ghost counted at least 15 armed men, probably more that he couldn't see from his position. When the time came to take his shot, he would need to be prepared for an immediate fighting withdrawal, as the enemy would quickly realize where the shot had come from. Through his high-powered scope, Ghost could see individual details of the compound with crystal clarity. He watched guards rotating through their positions, noted the locations of heavy weapons, and identified the most likely routes his target would use when arriving. Every detail was important. Every observation might prove crucial when the moment of truth arrived. This meticulous preparation was what separated professional snipers from ordinary marksmen. As afternoon moved toward evening, Ghost heard the distant sound of gunfire echoing from somewhere to his north. The sound was unmistakably American, weapons engaging in a firefight with enemy forces. This concerned him because there weren't supposed to be any other friendly forces operating in this area. His mission briefing had specifically mentioned that he would be alone in this sector to avoid conflicts between different operations. The gunfire continued sporadically for several minutes before falling silent. Ghost used his radio to contact his command post but received no immediate response. Communications in these mountains were often unreliable due to the terrain, so this wasn't necessarily cause for alarm. However, the presence of what sounded like an ongoing firefight in his operational area was definitely something that required investigation. While Ghost was considering whether to abandon his position to investigate the gunfire, he heard something that made his blood run cold. Echoing across the canyon from the north came a desperate human scream, clearly a woman's voice crying out for help. The sound carried clearly in the thin mountain air a plea for assistance that seemed to come from somewhere high up on the opposite ridge. Ghost immediately shifted his attention from the compound to the source of the scream. Using his spotting scope, he began scanning the ridgeline where the sound had originated. What he saw through his optics made him curse under his breath. A woman in American military uniform was falling from a cliff face, her body tumbling through the air toward what would certainly be a fatal impact with the rocky slope below. Without hesitation, Ghost swung his rifle toward the falling figure and acquired her in his scope. The distance was extreme, nearly 1,800 meters, and the target was moving rapidly through the air. This was not a shot that any normal marksman would attempt, but Ghost Morrison was far from normal. His mind automatically calculated wind speed, distance, bullet drop, and the complex trajectory needed to intercept a falling human being. In that split second, Ghost made a decision that went against every principle of sniper warfare. Instead of maintaining his concealed position and completing his original mission, he chose to attempt an impossible shot to save the life of a fellow soldier. The woman was falling toward a rocky outcropping about 200 feet below the cliff edge. If he could somehow slow her fall or change her trajectory, she might survive the impact. Ghost's plan was audacious and desperate. He would fire a shot that would strike the rock face directly in the path of the fallen woman, creating a shower of stone fragments that might cushion her impact or at least break her fall slightly. It was a 1 in a million chance, but it was the only chance she had. The alternative was to watch helplessly as a fellow American soldier died in these foreign mountains. The shot had to be perfect. Ghost controlled his breathing, felt his heartbeat, and squeezed the trigger at the exact moment when all variables aligned. The .308 Winchester round left his rifle at over 2,800 feet per second, beginning its journey across the canyon toward a target that existed for only a fraction of a second in a specific point in space and time. The bullet struck the rock face exactly where Ghost had aimed, just as the falling woman passed that point in her descent. The impact created a spray of rock fragments and dust that enveloped her falling form. It wasn't enough to stop her fall completely, but it altered her trajectory slightly, causing her to strike a ledge covered with loose scree rather than solid rock. Through his scope, Ghost watched the woman's body slam into the mountainside with tremendous force. She rolled and tumbled down the steep slope, bouncing off rocks and sliding through loose gravel, before finally coming to rest on a narrow ledge about halfway down the cliff face. She lay motionless, and Ghost couldn't tell if she was alive or dead from his position across the canyon. What Ghost could see clearly was the man standing at the top of the cliff where the woman had fallen. Through his scope, he observed an Afghan male in civilian clothing who was clearly responsible for pushing the American soldier over the edge. The man was looking down at his victim with obvious satisfaction, apparently believing that his work was done. Ghost felt a cold rage building inside him. He had witnessed an attempted murder, the betrayal of an American soldier by someone who had clearly gained her trust. The man on the cliff was celebrating what he believed was a successful kill, having no idea that his victim might still be alive or that he was being watched by one of the most skilled snipers in the American military. The range to the target on the cliff was challenging, but well within Ghost's capabilities. Unlike the impossible shot he had just attempted to save the fallen woman, this would be a straightforward elimination of a legitimate enemy target. The man had just attempted to murder an American soldier, making him a combatant regardless of his civilian clothing. Ghost acquired the target in his scope and took careful aim. The man was standing near the cliff edge, probably preparing to signal his accomplices that the job was complete. Ghost controlled his breathing, steadied his rifle, and prepared to deliver justice for the betrayal he had witnessed. The shot was perfect. The bullet struck the target's center mass, and the man on the cliff collapsed immediately. Through his scope, Ghost watched the body fall backward away from the edge, ensuring that this particular threat was permanently eliminated. It was a clean kill, the kind of precise elimination that had built his reputation over years of combat operations. But Ghost's work was far from over. The woman on the ledge might still be alive, and if she was, she would need immediate medical assistance. The gunfire he had heard earlier suggested that there might be other American soldiers in the area, possibly her team members who were also in danger. Ghost realized that his original mission would have to be postponed while he dealt with this new situation. Using his radio, Ghost finally managed to establish contact with his command post. He reported the situation briefly, requesting immediate medical evacuation for a wounded American soldier and providing coordinates for the woman's location. The response was immediate and professional. A rescue helicopter would be dispatched as soon as one became available. Ghost knew that helicopter rescue in these mountains was dangerous and time-consuming. The woman would need to survive on that ledge for several hours before help could reach her. His decision to intervene had saved her from immediate death, but she still faced a desperate fight for survival in one of the most hostile environments on Earth. Through his scope, Ghost maintained observation of the ledge where the woman lay motionless. He couldn't tell if she was breathing from his position, but occasionally he thought he detected slight movement. If she was alive, she was probably severely injured, and in desperate need of medical attention that wouldn't arrive for hours. The legendary sniper who had spent his career eliminating enemies from impossible distances now found himself in the unfamiliar role of guardian angel. He would maintain his vigil through the night if necessary, protecting an injured soldier he had never met, but whose life had become his responsibility the moment he chose to take that impossible shot across the canyon. Maria Santos drifted in and out of consciousness, her mind struggling to process what had happened to her. The world was a haze of pain and confusion, with fragmented memories of falling, of rocks rushing past her face, of the terrible moment when she realized Rashid intended to kill her. Every part of her body screamed in agony, but the fact that she could feel pain meant she was still alive, something that seemed impossible given what she remembered of her fall. She lay on a narrow ledge roughly 10 feet wide and perhaps 20 feet long, carved into the cliff face by centuries of wind and water erosion. The ledge was covered with loose scree and small boulders that had broken away from the rock face above. It was these loose rocks that had probably saved her life, creating a slightly softer landing than the solid stone would have provided. Even so, the impact had been devastating. Maria's left arm was clearly broken, bent at an unnatural angle that made her stomach lurch when she tried to look at it. Her ribs felt like someone had beaten her with a baseball bat, and every breath sent sharp spikes of pain through her chest. Blood trickled from various cuts and scrapes covering her face and hands, and she could taste copper in her mouth from what was probably a split lip or bitten tongue. When she tried to move, waves of dizziness washed over her, suggesting a concussion to add to her other injuries. Her legs seemed to work, though her right ankle felt wrong when she put weight on it. Inventory of her equipment revealed that her rifle was gone, probably lying broken somewhere at the bottom of the canyon. Her sidearm was still in its holster, though she doubted she could use it effectively with her injuries. The most immediate problem was her location. The ledge she had landed on was approximately halfway down the 300-foot cliff face. Above her, the rock wall rose nearly straight up, offering no obvious way to climb back to the top. Below her, the cliff continued down to a rocky slope that eventually led to the canyon floor. In her current condition, attempting to climb either up or down would almost certainly result in another fall, this one fatal. Maria tried to remember her survival training. In a situation like this, the priority was shelter, signaling for rescue, and treating injuries in that order. The ledge provided some protection from the elements, but night was coming and temperatures in these mountains could drop well below freezing. Her uniform would provide some insulation, but she would need to find a way to stay warm through the night. Signaling for rescue was complicated by her location. Her radio had been damaged in the fall, the antenna bent and the case cracked. She tried turning it on, but received only static. Even if it had worked, the surrounding terrain would have made communication difficult. The steep canyon walls would block radio signals in most directions, leaving her effectively cut off from the outside world. The gunfire she had heard during her struggle with Rashid had stopped, leaving an ominous silence that made her fear for her team's safety. If they had been ambushed, as she suspected, her 4 soldiers might be dead or captured. The thought that her trust in Rashid had led her entire team into a trap filled her with guilt that was almost worse than the physical pain of her injuries. As evening approached, Maria began to feel the cold seeping into her bones. The mountain air was thin and dry, and without the sun's warmth, the temperature dropped rapidly. She tried to gather some of the loose rocks around her to create a windbreak, but her broken arm made the work slow and painful. Every movement sent fresh waves of agony through her battered body. The worst part was the uncertainty. Maria had no idea if anyone knew where she was or if rescue operations were even being planned. Her team's mission was supposed to last 2 days, so she might not be reported missing for another 24 hours. By then, exposure and dehydration could easily kill her, even if her injuries didn't. The irony wasn't lost on her that she had survived combat operations for 8 months only to die from a fall after being betrayed by someone she had tried to help. Despite her desperate situation, Maria's military training kept her focused on survival. She rationed the water in her canteens, knowing that dehydration would be a major threat. She also had emergency rations that could last several days if she was careful. The broken arm would heal if she could immobilize it properly, and the other injuries, while painful, didn't seem life-threatening if she could get medical attention within a reasonable time. As darkness fell over the canyon, Maria heard something that made her heart race with hope. The distant sound of a helicopter echoed off the canyon walls, growing louder as it approached her location. She fumbled for her emergency signal mirror with her good hand, trying to catch what little moonlight was available to create a reflection that might be visible from the air. The helicopter circled the area for what felt like hours, and Maria could see its searchlights sweeping back and forth across the canyon walls. Several times the beam passed close to her position, but never directly illuminated her ledge. The pilot was clearly looking for something, probably responding to reports of the gunfight her team had been involved in. But the narrow ledge was difficult to spot from above, especially in darkness. Maria tried everything she could think of to signal the helicopter. She waved her good arm, used her signal mirror to reflect the aircraft's own searchlight, and even fired several rounds from her sidearm into the air. But the helicopter eventually moved away, the sound of its rotors fading into the distance until she was alone again with the cold mountain wind. The disappointment was crushing. Rescue had been so close that she could hear the voices of the crew over their helicopter's loudspeakers as they called out, searching for survivors. But in the darkness and challenging terrain, they had missed her completely. Maria realized that she would have to survive through the night and hope for another chance when daylight returned. The temperature continued to drop, and Maria began to shiver uncontrollably. Hypothermia was now her most immediate threat, potentially more dangerous than her injuries. She tried to stay active within the limited space of the ledge, moving around just enough to maintain circulation without risking another fall. The broken arm made even simple movements difficult, and the pain was constant and exhausting. Sometime during the long night, Maria thought she heard something that couldn't be explained by wind or settling rocks. It sounded almost like a human voice calling out across the canyon, though she couldn't make out any words. She called back as loudly as her injured condition would allow, but received no response. It might have been her imagination, a product of pain, exhaustion, and hope creating sounds that weren't really there. What Maria didn't know was that her desperate cries for help during her fall had been heard by someone with the skills and determination to do something about her situation. Master Sergeant David Morrison had maintained his vigil through the night, watching over her location through his powerful scope and coordinating with rescue operations. Her survival had become his personal mission, and he was not a man who accepted failure easily. Ghost had observed the helicopter search and had used his radio to guide the aircraft as close as possible to Maria's position. The crew had been unable to locate her in the darkness, but they would return at first light with better equipment and a more precise understanding of where to look. Ghost's detailed observations and precise coordinates would make the difference between another failed search and a successful rescue. Throughout the night, Ghost also monitored enemy activity in the area. The gunfight Maria's team had been involved in had attracted attention from Taliban forces, and several groups were moving through the canyon system, probably searching for survivors or evidence of what had happened. Ghost's position allowed him to track these movements and provide early warning if any enemy forces approached Maria's location. As dawn approached, Maria was barely conscious. The combination of injuries, cold, and exhaustion had pushed her to the limit of human endurance. Her body temperature had dropped dangerously low, and she was showing signs of severe hypothermia. Without immediate medical intervention, she might not survive another hour, let alone another night on the exposed ledge. But help was finally coming. Ghost had been in constant communication with rescue operations throughout the night, providing updates on Maria's condition and enemy activity in the area. A specially equipped rescue helicopter with medical personnel was en route, and this time they knew exactly where to look. The morning light would provide the visibility needed for a precision rescue operation. Maria's fight for survival was far from over, but she was no longer alone. The legendary sniper who had saved her life with an impossible shot across the canyon had spent the night ensuring that his initial intervention wouldn't be wasted. Ghost Morrison had turned her rescue into his personal mission, and he had never failed a mission that mattered this much. The sun was beginning to rise over the Afghan mountains, bringing warmth and hope back to a woman who had endured one of the longest nights of her life. Maria Santos was about to learn that sometimes, when everything seems lost and death appears certain, there are still heroes in the world who refuse to let good people die on their watch. The mountains had tested her strength, her will to survive, and her faith in human nature. She had been betrayed by someone she trusted, thrown from a cliff by an enemy who wanted her dead, and left broken and alone in one of the most hostile environments on Earth. But she had also been saved by a stranger who asked for nothing in return except the satisfaction of knowing that he had done the right thing when it mattered most. As Maria heard the approaching sound of helicopter rotors for the second time, she allowed herself to believe that she might actually survive this ordeal. The nightmare was almost over, but the memory of her fall and rescue would stay with her forever. A reminder that even in the darkest moments, unexpected heroes can appear when they are needed most. The sound of approaching helicopters filled the canyon as dawn broke over the Afghan mountains. This time, it wasn't a search operation flying blind through hostile territory. Thanks to Master Sergeant Morrison's precise coordinates and overnight surveillance, the rescue team knew exactly where to find Maria Santos. 2 aircraft were incoming. A medical evacuation helicopter, equipped with specialized rescue equipment, and an Apache gunship providing security against enemy forces in the area. Ghost had spent the entire night coordinating the rescue operation from his concealed position. His radio had been busy with reports to command, updates on Maria's condition as observed through his scope, and detailed intelligence about enemy movement patterns in the canyon system. Several Taliban groups had been drawn to the area by the earlier gunfight, but Ghost's warnings had allowed the rescue team to plan their approach to avoid contact with hostile forces. Through his high-powered optics, Ghost could see that Maria was still alive but barely conscious. Her movements had become increasingly sluggish throughout the night, and she was showing clear signs of hypothermia and shock. The broken arm hung uselessly at her side, and her attempts to signal the approaching aircraft were weak and uncoordinated. Without immediate medical intervention, her survival window was measured in minutes rather than hours. The medical evacuation helicopter, a UHS-60 Blackhawk, configured for combat rescue operations, approached Maria's position with extraordinary skill. Pilot, Chief Warrant Officer Sarah Chen, had over 15 years of experience flying rescue missions in some of the world's most challenging environments. Her crew included a flight medic, a pararescue specialist, and a crew chief who doubled as a door gunner. The biggest challenge was the location of Maria's ledge. At nearly 200 feet above the canyon floor and 150 feet below the cliff top, it was too high for ground-based rescue and too confined for the helicopter to land. The rescue would require a precision hover operation, with the pararescue specialist fast roping down to Maria's position while the aircraft maintained a stable position in difficult wind conditions created by the canyon walls. Chief Chen brought her aircraft into a hover approximately 50 feet from the cliff face, close enough for the rescue operation but far enough away to avoid the dangerous downdrafts created by rotor wash bouncing off the rocks. The canyon walls created turbulent air conditions that made holding position extremely difficult, requiring constant corrections and precise control inputs to maintain the delicate balance needed for the rescue. Staff Sergeant Marcus Johnson, the pararescue specialist, prepared for one of the most challenging rescues of his career. A veteran of over 200 combat rescue operations, he had extracted wounded soldiers from every conceivable situation, but a narrow ledge halfway down a cliff face presented unique difficulties. He would have to rappel down to Maria's position, assess her injuries, provide immediate medical treatment, and then secure her for extraction back to the helicopter. Ghost continued his overwatch role, scanning the surrounding area for threats while monitoring the rescue operation through his scope. He had observed several enemy groups moving through the valley during the night, and while none were in immediate proximity to the rescue site, the situation could change rapidly. His rifle remained trained on potential approach routes, ready to eliminate any threat that might emerge during the vulnerable rescue operation. The fast rope deployment went smoothly, with Sergeant Johnson rappelling down to Maria's ledge with practiced precision. The moment he reached her position, he began a rapid medical assessment. Her condition was worse than it had appeared from a distance. Severe hypothermia, a compound fracture of the left arm, multiple rib fractures, and signs of significant internal injuries from the impact of her fall. Johnson worked quickly to stabilize Maria for transport. He started an IV line to combat dehydration and shock, immobilized her broken arm with an inflatable splint, and wrapped her in thermal blankets to begin treating the hypothermia. Her level of consciousness was dangerously low, and he was concerned about the possibility of internal bleeding that could prove fatal if not treated immediately. The most critical part of the rescue was getting Maria off the ledge and into the helicopter. Johnson secured her in a Stokes basket, a rigid stretcher designed for helicopter rescue operations. The basket would be lifted by the helicopter's hoist, while he remained attached to provide medical care during the ascent. This phase of the operation was extremely dangerous, as any malfunction of the hoist system or sudden change in wind conditions could send both rescuer and patient plummeting to the canyon floor. Chief Chen demonstrated her exceptional flying skills by maintaining a rock-steady hover while the hoist operation proceeded. The canyon's wind conditions were treacherous, with unpredictable gusts and downdrafts that constantly tried to push her aircraft into the cliff face. She made dozens of minute corrections, using every bit of her experience to keep the helicopter in the precise position needed for a successful extraction. Ghost watched the rescue unfold through his scope, ready to provide sniper support if any threats materialized. He had identified several potential enemy positions in the surrounding terrain, and his radio crackled with updates from other surveillance assets in the area. The rescue operation was attracting attention, and intelligence suggested that Taliban forces were moving to intercept the helicopters before they could escape the area. The hoist operation proceeded smoothly until Maria and Sergeant Johnson were about halfway to the helicopter. At that moment, Ghost spotted movement on a ridge approximately 800 meters from the rescue site. Through his scope, he could see armed men setting up what appeared to be a heavy machine gun position, with a clear line of sight to the hovering helicopter. Without hesitation, Ghost shifted his aim to the enemy position and fired. His first shot struck the gunner before he could open fire on the defenseless aircraft. A second shot eliminated the assistant gunner, and a third scattered the remaining enemy soldiers. The entire engagement lasted less than 30 seconds, but it prevented what could have been a catastrophic attack on the rescue operation. The sound of Ghost's rifle shots echoed across the canyon, alerting both the rescue crew and other enemy forces in the area to the presence of hostile activity. Chief Chen immediately radioed for permission to abort the rescue, but Sergeant Johnson was already in the aircraft with Maria, and any delay could prove fatal for the critically injured soldier. Instead of aborting, Chief Chen made the decision to continue the mission while requesting immediate close air support from the Apache gunship. The attack helicopter had been orbiting the area at a safe distance, but now moved in to provide direct fire support against any additional threats that might emerge. Its 30mm chain gun and Hellfire missiles would discourage enemy forces from attempting to interfere with the rescue. Maria was finally pulled into the helicopter, unconscious but alive. Sergeant Johnson immediately began advanced medical treatment while Chief Chen initiated departure procedures. The flight to the nearest military hospital would take 20 minutes, and Maria's condition was so critical that every second counted. Johnson worked frantically to stabilize her vital signs while the aircraft raced across the Afghan landscape. Ghost observed the helicopter's departure with satisfaction, knowing that his intervention had made the difference between a successful rescue and a potential tragedy. But his work wasn't finished. Intelligence reports indicated that enemy forces were converging on the area, probably planning to search for any evidence of what had happened, or to capture any additional survivors from Maria's original team. The legendary sniper made the decision to remain in position and continue his mission. His original target, the Taliban commander, was still believed to be in the compound below, and the rescue operation might have provided the perfect distraction for the meeting to take place. Ghost settled back into his concealed position, his rifle once again trained on the target building. Through his scope, Ghost could see increased activity around the compound. Several vehicles had arrived during the rescue operation, and armed men were taking positions around the perimeter. This suggested that the meeting intelligence had predicted was indeed about to take place, possibly accelerated by the morning's events. The enemy might be planning an immediate response to the American rescue operation. As the medical helicopter disappeared into the distance carrying Maria Santos towards life-saving treatment, Ghost felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. He had successfully saved the life of a fellow soldier while maintaining his primary mission posture. The impossible shot that had broken her fall, the overnight vigil that had kept her location secure, and the sniper support that had protected the rescue operation were all part of a night's work for a professional like Ghost Morrison. But the mission wasn't over. The Taliban commander was still out there, still planning operations against American forces, still a threat that needed to be eliminated. Ghost had proved that he was willing to risk his primary mission to save a single soldier's life, but now it was time to complete the task he had originally been sent to accomplish. The compound below was stirring with activity as morning progressed. Ghost settled in for what might be a long wait, his rifle steady and his mind focused on the mission ahead. He had saved Maria Santos from certain death, but now it was time to ensure that the enemy who had tried to kill her would face justice for their crimes against American soldiers serving in these hostile mountains. The rescue had been successful, but the war continued. Ghost Morrison would remain at his post, a guardian angel with a rifle, watching over his fellow soldiers and eliminating the threats that sought to harm them. This was his calling, his purpose, and his gift to the soldiers who depended on him to keep them safe in one of the most dangerous places on Earth. 3 weeks after her rescue from the mountain ledge, Maria Santos lay in a hospital bed at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany, slowly recovering from injuries that should have killed her. The doctors called her survival miraculous, but Maria knew the truth was more complex than divine intervention. Someone had saved her life with precision and skill, and she was determined to find out who. The medical team had worked around the clock to save her life after the helicopter delivered her to the forward surgical unit. Her injuries had been extensive: compound fracture of the left arm, 4 broken ribs, severe concussion, hypothermia, and internal bleeding that had required emergency surgery. The doctors said that another hour of exposure on that mountain ledge would have been fatal, making the timing of her rescue crucial to her survival. During her recovery, Maria had been debriefed multiple times by military intelligence officers, trying to piece together exactly what had happened during that disastrous patrol. She told them about Rashid's betrayal, about being pushed from the cliff, and about the impossible shot that had somehow broken her fall. The intelligence officers listened politely, but she could see skepticism in their eyes when she described being saved by a mysterious marksman. The official report stated that Staff Sergeant Santos had survived her fall due to favorable terrain conditions and extraordinary luck. There was no mention of sniper intervention, no recognition of the precision shot that had altered her trajectory just enough to save her life. This frustrated Maria enormously, because she knew someone had deliberately acted to save her, and that person deserved recognition for their heroic actions. Her team members had not been as fortunate. The ambush that followed her separation from the group had resulted in 2 deaths and 2 wounded soldiers. Corporal Jake Williams and Specialist Tommy Chen had been killed in the initial attack, while Private Rodriguez and Sergeant Thompson had been wounded but managed to fight their way to a defensible position until rescue arrived. The loss of 2 good soldiers weighed heavily on Maria's conscience, even though she knew the blame belonged entirely with Rashid and his Taliban associates. The investigation into the ambush had revealed that Rashid was part of a sophisticated intelligence operation designed to lure American forces into kill zones. He had been providing information to Taliban commanders for months, helping them target isolated patrols and reconnaissance teams. The intelligence he provided about Maria's mission had been used to set up the ambush that killed 2 of her soldiers and nearly killed her as well. What the investigators didn't know, and what Maria couldn't prove, was that someone had been watching over the entire operation from a concealed position. Master Sergeant David Morrison had completed his original mission after the rescue, eliminating the Taliban commander who had been responsible for ordering the ambush. His after-action report made no mention of the rescue operation or his intervention to save Maria's life, maintaining the secrecy that was essential to his effectiveness as a sniper. Ghost had watched through his scope as the Taliban commander arrived at the compound, just as intelligence had predicted. The man had been celebrating what he believed was a successful operation against American forces, unaware that one of his intended victims had survived and that his own death was imminent. Ghost shot had been perfect, eliminating a high-value target who would never again threaten American soldiers. The compound had erupted in chaos following the commander's death, with enemy fighters searching desperately for the sniper who had struck from an impossible distance. But Ghost was already gone, having withdrawn from his position using skills honed over 15 years of similar operations. By the time enemy reinforcements arrived at his former location, he was miles away, moving through terrain that would leave no trace of his passage. Maria's frustration with the official version of events led her to conduct her own investigation. She used her security clearance and contacts within the intelligence community to research what other operations had been taking place in her area on the day of the ambush. What she found was a classified after-action report describing the elimination of a Taliban commander by a lone sniper operating in the same general area where she had been rescued. The report was heavily redacted, but Maria was able to piece together enough information to realize that the sniper who had killed the Taliban commander was probably the same person who had saved her life. The timing was perfect, the location was correct, and the level of skill required for both operations suggested a marksman of exceptional ability. Her research led her to stories about a legendary sniper known only as Ghost, whose reputation among Special Operations Forces bordered on mythical. According to the rumors she heard, Ghost had been operating in Afghanistan for over a year, eliminating high-value targets with precision shots from impossible distances. He was said to work alone, to appear wherever he was needed most, and to never leave a job unfinished. Maria became obsessed with finding this mysterious figure and thanking him for saving her life. She used every resource at her disposal, called in favors from friends in intelligence units, and spent hours poring over classified documents trying to identify the man who had given her a second chance at life. But Ghost Morrison was too professional and too careful to leave traces that could be followed by someone outside the special operations community. The closest Maria came to finding her rescuer was through a chance conversation with a military chaplain who had served with special operations forces. The chaplain mentioned knowing a sniper who had a reputation for impossible shots and who was said to have saved several soldiers' lives through his intervention in critical situations. But when pressed for details, the chaplain claimed not to know the sniper's real name or current assignment. What Maria didn't realize was that Ghost had been keeping track of her recovery through official channels. He had read her medical reports, knew about her investigation into the events of that day, and was quietly proud that she had survived her injuries to return to active duty. For Ghost, saving her life had been simply the right thing to do, requiring no recognition or thanks beyond the knowledge that a good soldier had lived to fight another day. As Maria's physical therapy progressed and she prepared to return to active duty, she made peace with the fact that she might never identify her anonymous rescuer. The important thing was that someone had cared enough to risk their own mission to save her life. In a war zone where death could come at any moment, that kind of selfless heroism was what separated the merely brave from the truly legendary. Her new assignment would take her away from Afghanistan, ending any realistic chance of encountering the mysterious sniper who had saved her. But Maria carried with her a renewed appreciation for the bonds between soldiers and a determination to honor the sacrifice made on her behalf. She would live her life in a way that justified the risk someone had taken to save her. Ghost Morrison continued his work in the mountains of Afghanistan, a phantom guardian watching over American soldiers from concealed positions they would never know existed. His service record remained classified, his true identity known only to a select few within the special operations community. But among the soldiers who served in those hostile mountains, stories were told of impossible shots and mysterious rescues, of a legendary marksman who appeared when hope seemed lost. The war in Afghanistan would eventually end, but the bonds forged between soldiers in combat would endure forever. Maria Santos had learned that sometimes heroes come in forms you never expect, that salvation can arrive from directions you never imagined, and that the most important victories are often the ones that nobody ever hears about. Years later, when Maria had achieved her own rank of Master Sergeant and was training new soldiers, she would tell them about the importance of never giving up, even in the most desperate circumstances. She would speak about the invisible threads that connect all soldiers, the unspoken promise that they would never abandon each other, and the mysterious ways that help can arrive when it's needed most. She never mentioned the legendary sniper by name because she still didn't know it, but she made sure every soldier under her command understood that somewhere out there, people were watching over them. People who would risk everything to bring them home safely. In a dangerous world, that knowledge could make all the difference between hope and despair. The mountains of Afghanistan had tested Maria Santos in the most brutal way possible, breaking her body and challenging her spirit. But they had also shown her the best of human nature, the willingness of strangers to sacrifice for each other, and the power of skill and determination to overcome seemingly impossible odds. Ghost Morrison remained in the shadows where he belonged, a legend among those who knew, a mystery to those who didn't, and a guardian angel to all who served. His impossible shot had saved one soldier's life, but his example inspired countless others to believe that in the darkest moments, heroes still walked among them, watching, waiting, and ready to act when courage was needed most. The story of Maria Santos and the legendary sniper who saved her became one of those tales that soldiers tell each other during long nights in hostile territory, a reminder that they are never truly alone, never completely without hope, and never beyond the reach of those who have sworn to protect them. In a world where bad things happen to good people, it was proof that sometimes, just sometimes, good things happen too.